Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today for the third talk in the RIBA People, Place, Planet series. This is a programme of online events and activities bringing focus to the climate emergency, sustainability and the built environment. This series is sponsored by Ibstock Brick and we're thankful for their support. Details will be posted in the chat should you wish to contact them. I am Mark Raby, your host for this event and co-chair of RIBA Somerset. My counterpart and co-chair Tom Gascoigne will be hosting the Q&A at the end of Alison's talk. Alison Brooks needs little introduction as the seminal architect of our time. Her work spans from several one-off private dwellings to countless mass housing projects, which she defines as the social product of contemporary architecture. Her work also crosses into healthcare, education, museums, and is a responsible architecture, socially and environmentally, yet deeply rooted in art and design. From Somerset House in Essex, Courtyard and New Hall, through works for Oxford and Cambridge colleges, The Smile, Kilburn Quarter, Cadence, the list goes on. The body of work already feels like it crosses a generation. Alison not only has some great work, but is well placed to give a balanced view of sustainability and how to create a lasting architecture that improves the built fabric of our lives. This accolade is well recognised by many national awards, including, not limited to, the 3 RIBA National Awards, the House of the Year, the Sterling Prize, and the Stephen Lawrence Prize. We have asked Alison to tell us how her work evolves out of these contemporary constraints, climate change, the current pandemic, and a growing ecological catastrophe, and how as a designer she allows constraints to refresh and invigorate her work. These are some very real challenges, and we look to her as a leader in our industry to ask how we might go about adapting our practice to respond, remain relevant, and ensure resilience. Furthermore, within this context, how do we continue to foster an inspiring and unique architecture? We've also asked Alison to talk about the local context and the story of the Taunton Maggie Centre, a subject close to our hearts. The project has been welcomed by the local council and stakeholders, but hit a brick wall in its loss of some common playing field land gifted by the local community as open space. It presents a live and very real turn in a complex project that I'm sure many of us can relate to, and we're keen to see how it can be revitalised. And so, without further ado, let's welcome our guest speaker, Alison Brooks.
Thanks very much for that introduction. I'm just going to try to share my screen here. Close this window. Oops. Can everybody see this? Is it working? Full screen? Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. Also to everybody at RIBA Somerset. It's an honor to be asked to speak. And yeah, I'd like to take you through, I think I've got 5 projects in this talk, and I decided to call it Dwelling, which is similar to a talk I gave for the students at the University of Bath last year. And it's because I do think fundamentally architecture is about dwelling, whether it's in the workplace, at home, in the commercial environment, at leisure. We dwell on the planet, and the way we dwell, I think, is going to change after this pandemic. I think we've all been made aware of the fragility of our place on the planet, of our health, and the social and economic crises that are happening at the same time. They're all intertwined. I think this kind of awakening that we've had over the last year is going to have an impact on how we all move forward, and hopefully in looking at the world through fresh eyes and with a greater understanding of the importance of every kind of behavior and how we dwell it, with nature, not just utilizing it. Okay, I'm going to try to change slides. So I thought it might be useful to give you a bit of background. I actually come from a very small town in southern Ontario called Welland, and this is a sort of 1820s map on the left with the green dot showing where Welland is on the canal that actually joins Lake Ontario with Lake Erie. And that canal allowed shipping to come from the Atlantic and into the center of North America via the Great Lakes. And so the important thing about Welland was its canal and its bridges. And on the right, you can see one of its famous lifting bridges. And this was a very important experience when I was a young girl, because I had to cross this bridge whenever I went downtown or where my father's office was. And I was always really compelled by this house, which sat on the middle of the lifting bridge. And I thought somebody must live in this house, and what an amazing thing it is to be in a dwelling that moves up and down and is incredibly sort of frightening and fascinating at the same time. And in a way, the identity of the town was all about this bridge. And sadly, in the 1970s, a new canal was built. The ships no longer came through this part of the province. A new road was built, this motorway on the left that you can see, that kind of cancelled the experience and the usefulness of the lifting bridge. And a big shopping mall was built on the outskirts of town that you can see on the right. And I like to quote Gertrude Stein, her position about many towns in North America where there is no there. And I feel that to a certain extent, one of the reasons I left North America and came to the UK was in a way in search of places with identity, places with history and quality. Not to say that there aren't many places like that in Canada, but I think it's incomparable, even a city like Toronto or Montreal, incomparable to London and what the European urban and cultural context offers. So here we are in London, and so I came here in 1988 and set up my practice in 96, and this map shows, I mean, I just love the plan of London as a urban form. It's organic qualities, and it's obviously it's so interspersed with garden squares and parks. And I've had the good fortune to work in many different neighborhoods around the city, and I'm going to talk about a few of them. But one of my most favorite places in London that sort of expresses this idea of identity and longevity and culture is Somerset House. William Chambers in 1780 built it as his concept was really a set of houses, basically officers' houses, around a courtyard. And this quadrangle was one of the first examples of a kind of complete urban block, sort of mixed use. It's the first example of a mixed use block that contained dwellings plus the civil service, the Royal Academy of Arts, Geological Society, etc. And this building has adapted over time, as we know, to become an amazing cultural institution with the Courtauld Institute, King's College, gallery, many festivals happen here. And now Makerversity has startups and incubator spaces working in its sort of basement levels. So for me, it's just an example of a kind of archetypal urban form that has adapted over time. It sort of started as dwellings and mixed uses. Now it's become a cultural institution. And this is the kind of great archetypal pieces of architecture that contribute over time, and for me are not just the kind of culture of the city and of the place, but of memory. And this kind of robustness, both conceptually and physically, is something I strive for in my work. And fortunately, I was able to stage my 21-year anniversary of the of founding Alison Brooks Architects at Somerset House in the Embankment Galleries. And we staged an exhibition and a lecture with videos and a big event. And I also used it as an opportunity to launch my book, or a kind of catalog called Ideals Then Ideas. And in this book, which is a kind of collection of ideals and ideas, it's not constructed as a kind of monograph. It's much more like a kind of scrapbook. But at the beginning, I defined what I consider my 4 ideals as an architect, which are authenticity, generosity, civicness, and beauty. And within those ideals, the book focuses on sort of devices or tactics that I've used in terms of trying to explore and express those ideals. And I'm going to talk mainly about the idea of archetypes in this talk, because for me, the archetypal form, whether it's a tower, a house, a courtyard, a quadrangle, these are what we all build on as architects. We are always in conversation with the past, and we are always in dialogue, modifying, reinterpreting, reconstructing history. And so I like to show this slide in particular to audiences when I'm speaking in North America, because for me, it's the kind of archetypal urban form in London, which is the kind of Georgian square, garden square, and the fact that the terraced houses that line most of sort of 18th and 18th century and early 19th century streets in London have adapted over time to become many different things, such as Bedford Square here, which of course has the AA and hotels, offices, many different uses. So on the other hand, I've also done work, my practice has led me to do things such as the Smile, which is actually, it was an installation, a temporary installation, an experimental project using hardwood CLT as part of the London Design Festival. And although this is not an example of sort of building for a kind of timelessness, in a way, the purity of form, of material, of structure, and of experience that the Smile offered is a kind of amazing goal, amazing opportunity to have achieved. Something very difficult to achieve when you work in housing or other more complex briefs. But it was an opportunity to participate in a kind of more scientific exploration of how to create a carbon negative building. It actually embeds and stores more carbon than was used in construction. It was actually, hardwood CLT is the future, but it has to be certified in the UK. And that's one of the purposes of this project, was to contribute to that research. So now I'm going to talk about the housing projects that were mentioned in the introduction. I'm only going to talk about one of them, I'm going to talk about a couple of them, but this first one is Ely Court in South Kilburn. And I call this, I describe this as civicness. I believe that housing is civic architecture. It's the most important kind of civic public architecture because it frames and contributes to the majority of our civic life in terms of urban area, streetscapes, our shared environment. So working in housing is about city building, and it's also about reinforcing and bringing together people in the public realm. So I've worked on 3 projects in South Kilburn, and the first one I'm going to talk about is up here in Ely Court. I actually live very close by. I live over here, so this was like working in my own neighborhood. So the pressure is on to do something good if you have to live very near your work. So I also like to show this plan of London in 1939, and for me, it shows a kind of realization of a sort of perfect Victorian city. It's, I think the Victorians, the 19th century developers and urban designers were really amazing. It was a sort of high point in urban planning that isn't really talked about because so much attention is focused on the garden suburb, but actually there were great cities planned in the 19th century. And South Kilburn, which is more or less this sort of wedge-shaped piece of London, was this very interesting, very structured piece of London with parks and avenues and boulevards and shops and a high street. And it was basically demolished in the 1950s. So on the left was more or less the character of the residential streets. There were some bombings, but mainly it was urban renewal as a kind of social and socio-economic project. This was the plan to replace all those streets and terraces. And this is one of the first buildings that was built that's still there in South Kilburn. One of the first multi-story in situ concrete high-rise buildings, and you can see it here in the top left corner. And so the site that I was competing for is more or less this site here outlined in blue. And I think what you can see here is, well, we can see it everywhere, is there's a kind of divide, a sort of socio-economic divide between the housing estates, which are kind of like projects, self-contained projects that are physically and like segregated from the rest of the city. And this was, of course, done with all good intentions in the 1950s, but creates these kind of isolated communities. You never go in these places unless you live there. And so my strategy was to try to reintegrate, well, first of all, we had to sort of triple the density of the land that was there and restore the sort of the original fabric of the street and the grain. So on the left, the principle of establishing a consistent street frontage, breaking that frontage to create a new garden square in front of the existing slab block. Introducing a new lane to connect to the rest of the neighborhood, and then 3 different building typologies that address different parts of the site and create frontages, active frontages to all sides of the development site. And this is, this is a slightly random interjection into the talk, but this is what the majority of the character of South Kilburn are these precast concrete slab blocks on parking podiums. So this is not my immediate area of Ely Court, which was this, but it shows the kind of scaling up of that strategy. And this is what it's was like up until a year or 2 ago. There are new projects under construction here, but it's a kind of failed utopia. So the 3 building types that I developed for this project are primarily the mansion block type that you can see here on the street, with cores that are act as communal entrances. There are duplexes accessed from the street, so you have lots of front doors, a communal entrance, the sort of new garden square, a little point block with 1 flat per floor for disabled and large disabled tenants and very large families in the community, and then new terraced houses and an apartment block on the Mews. And this, you can see, responds to a new character of this Mews Street that connects up to the northern part of the site, where Lifshitz Davidson and Sandylans were working on their piece of this master plan. And this is the 3D model, and you can see how the dwellings are arranged, a real mix of duplexes and 1 beds and 2 beds, and the principle of many cores, and the principle of dual aspect units, which is the kind of core DNA of the mansion block. So a stair and lift that serves only one flat on either side of the stair in the core, which is a kind of amazing thing, and it means that every flat is dual aspect and wide. And I should mention that this project was sponsored by Brent Council. They have this model where they stage competitions for every phase in the master plan. They pick the architects, they employ the architects up to planning, and then they tender it to the market. So it's a kind of their guarantee that they get the design that they want that conforms to the master plan, and then it becomes a mixed development with with a mix of 40% affordable. So for example, on the left, this is an affordable block. This block is private, and the block around the corner is also social rent. But the important thing is that every block has consistency in terms of ceiling heights, 2.6 meter ceiling heights, French doors, sheltered balconies, inset balconies. And this kind of, for me, what's very important is the layering from the street to the front garden to the veranda or porch, which I bring from my sort of North American heritage, and to make every amenity space sheltered and private and protected from the rain. And here you can see how that creates a sense of space, additional space for the unit itself. And this is how our sort of point block, flat iron blocks works with the existing buildings and the neighbors across the street to create this kind of diverse framework for the garden square. And then the Muse houses around the back, which I think the first time terrace houses have been built in Kilburn in about 40 years. So the combination of 3-bed and 2-bed houses. So the diversity is kind of embedded within the scheme. And our subsequent scheme, we scaled up to doing a 6-story mansion block. So you can see this has a different scale, a different relationship to the street, but the same principles of a repeated module. And in a way, I was responding to the St. George's Church and the distance to emphasize the verticality of the church and create this rhythm. Pattern and rhythm are super important in housing, as well as proportions, window proportions. And you can see the same kind of language from Ely Court here of French doors and sheltered balconies. On the east side, high ceilings. On the top floor, they're 3 meters. They just make, and these are all social rent, these units, so they're really great flats. And in a way, they form part of a bigger family of housing projects that I've been working on for many years, from Accordia in Cambridge to Milton Keynes to Oxford, and really developing a similar language and the principles of a mansion block for every project. Now I'm going to scale back a bit to the private house, and I'm going to talk about Windward House, which is in Gloucestershire, so a little bit closer to where you all are. And again, this project, I think I started it in 2009. So, and the Ely Court, we started in 2010. So, I mean, architecture is slow, you all know that, but it's amazing how much time these projects take and how, in a way, that expresses how important it is to get it right. And it takes such a long time from beginning to when they open, that you have to really believe that what you're doing is absolutely correct, or you really, really believe in it, because it has to sustain you, like conceptually and as a project over many, many years. So Windward House is on a site in the highest point in Gloucestershire in St. Bravils. And I was invited to look at this existing house, a sort of 19th century farmhouse that had been converted and extended in the 1980s with lots of sort of unfortunate bits and pieces. But it had the most amazing, has the most amazing views, and this is one looking to the south over rolling fields. And it also had these sort of wonderful walled gardens. So there was a real opportunity here to work with that context in terms of topography, but also with the client's collection of African and Asian tribal art collected over pretty much a lifetime, and to make a house that actually acted as a home for this art and also a home for the owners and a place for them to entertain and have their extended family. And so these models show, I mean, the project was in really 4 phases. The first phase was the conversion of the farmhouse. The second phase was the west wing, which is the main house, which is fully accessible for wheelchair users for later life. And then the final phase was the pool house. And in a way, this project was, well, we had to really make the extension, the west wing, subservient to the farmhouse. So it is tucked behind and into the hillside. And I felt it was really important that the west wing, in a way, expresses the organic quality of the landscape and is sort of non-orthogonal and non-cellular, so it acts as a complete counterpoint to the Victorian farmhouse, which is very much made up of small cells. And here you can see the final scheme. So the house, the west wing, as a kind of series of folds, and a pitched roof that is a rolling roof that reflects the landscape, the walled gardens, and then finally the pool house. And these sections show how it's embedded into the landscape. So this is the farmhouse with its new gallery space and extension to bring light in from above, the recessed courtyard, and then the west wing with the staircase at its heart. It's an atrium house fundamentally with light at its center. And then a section looking the other way where the farmhouse, there's a sort of passage from the existing farmhouse and a ramp down to the new west wing, which is much more open and acts as a kind of audience to the garden to the west and the view to the south. And then the more secret sort of pool house farther away. And here these plans again show the kind of massive walls of the Victorian house, the cellular nature of the plan. This space was made into a gallery. This is a home office. Then the living space, which has the kitchen at its heart and a staircase that acts as an art display object, dining space, living, and then a kind of TV room at the back. And then on the upper floors, there's a kind of circulation around the atrium, a terrace overlooking the view, and 3 bedrooms, and one is used as an office. So the house is a kind of meandering thing. The geometry really comes from trying to make the roof geometry and the facades respond to views and create this sense of, in a way, movement, kind of indeterminacy. Here is the conversion of the west of the farmhouse, and then we installed ground source heat pumps. So a large area of meadow was dug. Well, actually it was a field, and then it afterward became a wildflower meadow. The conversion of the house, opening up triple height spaces, fireplace, so it's heated with wood from the property, and then the west wing being constructed, the staircase spine being dropped in. The stairs and treads are cantilevered from the spine, which acts as a stair for 100 objects. And then the final scheme in looking down from the hill above into the kitchen and dining room. And we developed, we worked with a local builder to make these really beautiful dry stone walls. So this is going to be a quick journey through to a visit to the house. Arriving from the drive, the owners planted all these new trees, indigenous trees. These are the ground source heat pump meadow on the right and the kind of restoration meadow on the left. The extension to the rear and the kind of informal courtyard to the rear, the sort of owner's entrance, and then this sort of historic formal frontage where you can see the kind of counterpoint of the west wing to the main house. It's set back and it's low, and its roof line is undulating, and it's very much buried in its garden in the summer. The cladding is Eternit, so very economical, relatively lightweight cladding, but it offered that opportunity to make the extension very dark, and the vertical lines sort of emphasize the lines of sort of trees and the very dark forests that you find in the Forest of Dean. This is moving around the house. You can see the stone walls coming into the living room, and you can actually see through the house from front to back. This is the recessed garden courtyard at the rear. The balustrade is just very simple stainless steel rods embedded in the top of a stone wall. And then inside the house, again, a kind of journey from the historic front hall up the stairs to the mezzanine. This is inside the living room with this sort of double height space that allows light to penetrate deep into the space. One of the great advantages of this collection is that it's mainly made in wood, sort of mahogany and tropical hardwoods, so they don't mind being in sunlight, so we were able to maximize sunlight throughout the house. And then this is the journey into the west wing, down the ramp, into the very open plan kitchen and dining area, which is the heart of the house, with panoramic views. I've done quite a few houses that have these columns, my little tribute to Mies, 4 paired steel angles with gaps in between. And this is, I think they're a nice thing to have in a space rather than being column free. And here on the right, you can see the staircase and the way it holds the small objects in the owner's collection. And on the right, from the kitchen counter, you can see up into the gallery above. So there are just moments around the house for certain pieces of art to be displayed, and the kitchen in a way is more like a furnished part of the living room rather than a kitchen per se. Again, and then this is in the living room, which opens up again to be a double height space, and you can see completely through the house here. In pretty much at any point in the house, you have 3 views in 3 directions. And then moving through the upstairs, at the top of the stairs, light coming from above. And then in the pool house, there are different kinds. It's very simple, just really a sort of guest overnight room and shower room. But the most important thing really for me is this moment where the owners can cook and do their amazing, prepare their amazing feasts sort of in the landscape. And this is very much, in a way, a kind of ideal relationship between being in a kitchen and being close to the outside. And this is the view in summer, where basically the extension completely disappears and you would never know it's there. And this is another funny thing about working in the UK. Most of my projects, at least the residential ones, the point has been to make them disappear because of the planning constraints. So yeah, it's not always that you have the opportunity to actually make something visible on a street frontage. So the next project is another kind of dwelling. It is again, it's collective dwelling. It's in Oxford, and it's the new Cohen Quadrangle for Exeter College in Oxford. It's another archetype. It's a transformation of the collegiate quad as a form, as a sort of archetypal form that you can see here in this view of Oxford. The city is basically made of quadrangles, and the quadrangles represent a college. So the architectural form represents a community, as well as forming the body of the urban grain. And Exeter College, sorry, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but it's here in the middle of the site. It's relatively small. It only has a small front and back quad, and then a scholar's garden back here. And they staged a competition in 2011 to basically design an extension, a new quadrangle for the college. And this slide is just to sort of describe the fact that the college is an autonomous thing. It's run by fellows. It's a kind of cooperative, and that's how all colleges work in Oxford. So you're not working for the University of Oxford. It's for the college and its fellows. So the college identified this site that you can see here in the top left, this sort of narrow and long site. And here on the right, sort of on the edge, next to Worcester College, on the edge of the kind of academic core of Oxford. And there, I mean, really the beginning of the project was all about kind of researching this type and understanding how quadrangles originally formed, the diversity of Exeter College and its architectural elements over time, the beautiful George Gilbert Scott Chapel, 19th century chapel in the Terrace Street quad, and the principle of sort of 2 rooms to a stair, sort of narrow buildings that you can see through, and understanding how to work with that typology in this site, which is very much a long and narrow site with this not great example of Edwardian Baroque architecture built in 1913, with lots of extensions down the side street from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The original building was built in 1913. So when we were working on this project, this building was not listed, but it was listed while it was in for planning, but we were prepared for the listing. And it's important because it was named after John Ruskin. It represents the education movement in England, and we tried to save the building, but in the end the project became a facade retention of that 1913 facade in order to make the whole building fully barrier-free and accessible. So the program of the building is really complex, ranging from porter's lodge and teaching spaces and auditoriums and music practice rooms to 90 study bedrooms, apartments, common rooms, family kitchens, as well as we added social learning space to the program and courtyards as we developed the scheme. And this was the kind of partie for the project. We sort of thought there are many variations you can do on the theme of the quadrangle, but what we ended up with was the S-shaped quad, which basically takes the kind of diagram that was already more or less there on the site and turns it into a kind of 2-sided quadrangle. And what this did was give us this opportunity at the middle of the building to create a new kind of space, an open, informal social learning space. So the building acts as a kind of journey from the entrance along beside the teaching block through a cloister to the social learning heart, along another cloister to the auditorium. And we use the kind of slope of the site to create 4 levels within the sort of ground floor spaces, and to create this sense of a continuous journey, that there would be no dead ends in the building, and it would always be a place where you could sort of amble and walk. And so these 2 main circulation devices, the 2 cloisters, each have a different expression, one a convex ellipsoidal form that you can see up here, that's a space that's created by these arches, timber arches, and then the north cloister is a concave ellipsoidal space that's formed by concrete arches, and these lead to the auditorium, which is another glue lamp structure. And this diagram sort of illustrates the principle of the scheme, which was to make this moment at the center of the building, the social learning space, at the point of maximum circulation, vertical circulation, horizontal circulation, and that this would basically allow a kind of spatial and visual flow between the north quad and the south quad. and really act to bring students out of their rooms, out of isolation, and work together in a new kind of communal space. And this is, the cloisters are actually glazed, the south cloisters, so in between these timber fins there is glass. And this is this kind of language of arches and curvature, which really comes from the, originated with the door, the entrance into Ruskin College, became also an idea of curved roof forms, of working with a single plane of metal that is cut and folded to create this stepping series of volumes that expresses the new, in a way, the new community and new identity for this, for the college. And this is how the section works. It's actually a 6-story building that steps down to being 1. So it's very much kind of disguising its capacity, also with the curved roof. And the curved roof allowed us to explore these really nice things that you get when you puncture a curved surface with a orthogonal frame. And this is how the program stacks up. The basement floor with the lower level of the learning commons, kitchen, restaurant, archive, back of house, plant rooms, junior common room, and then the teaching spaces on the ground floor and auditorium. And you can see the sort of social learning spaces flowing through. Then the workhorse, the student rooms with communal kitchens at the center of each floor, the kind of crossroads, another floor of student rooms, another floor of student rooms, and then these are fellows teaching offices and researchers teaching offices, and then another set of apartments for fellows. So it's about making really a campus within a building. And I won't go through the plans, but you can see the kind of density of spatial organization here. And I forgot to mention there's also a roof terrace carved out of the 3rd floor, so that one of the meeting rooms flows out onto that space. And probably the most controversial thing about the project was the roof, the fact that it's curved, it becomes a facade. It doesn't stick to the rules of being a roof in the only above parapet level. And it was really, the pattern was really inspired by the checkerboard pattern of the spire at the Turl Street quad, the original historic chapel lead work. And so this patterning I translated into a stainless steel shingle that gives the building its new identity and refers also back to the arts and crafts tradition, of which Jericho, its site, is famous for, and also William Morris, who was an alumnus of Exeter College. So we went through, I think, nearly 2 years of planning, consultations and presentations, and finally arrived at the point where we could start building. These are mock-ups that were made of the roof. The steel was made in a factory in Enfield, which was kind of amazing, like the printing of the sheets to achieve the color variation and the stippling to reduce reflection. Here's a very quick synopsis of the site. So the piling is finished. The basement excavation is about to start, and you can see the facade retention in the distance. And then the new concrete frame going up, the glulam auditorium structure, and then finally the roof going on, and the kind of craftsmanship that you still get when you work with metal in construction. I think it's one of the few remaining true crafts. And then the final building. So here you can see this kind of scaling of the form from the kind of institutional height of Walton Street, and then stepping down to become this single-story auditorium, which reflects the scale of the neighboring house. And now I'll again go on a kind of journey, how the building announces itself kind of subtly as simply a roof from Walton Street. As you turn the corner, you see more of the new parts of the building emerging. And then you enter the building through this kind of 19th century portal into a 21st century world of the foyers. There are 4-meter ceilings in the whole ground floor of this building. And this was basically to make the whole building accessible, because the previous building was 8 steps higher. So we lowered the floor, of course, to be level with the street. And this, by maintaining the retained facade, we retained its original floor and ceiling levels. And the cloister sort of pulls you into the building. The courtyard's visible on the left. The porter's lodge is a synopsis of all the building's materials: stone, cherry wood, brass, and concrete. That's kind of it in terms of the palette, and timber, of course, for the cloister. And because it's glazed, you get different qualities of light throughout the day, and it's always changing, so it's a very dynamic space. And then between those fins, you can look into the teaching spaces and seminar rooms. So anybody using those rooms also feels connected to the outdoors. This is behind one of the retained facades, a typical seminar room. They're also used as dining rooms for conferences and talks. And then the Learning Commons, which is kind of opening out into multiple levels of space that allow you to see the street, the North Quad, the auditorium, provide really different levels of privacy or acoustic separation for students. This is the same view. And then looking the other way, the space becomes kind of triple height, going down to the cafe, and you can see across into the gardens of Worcester College. And there's a cafe at this lower level. And the archive is also down here. This is the most popular spot in the whole building. It's this sort of triple height space, and it proves my argument that the higher the volume, the more amenable it is to occupation. And then the other principle, though, is also that every space in the building can be used as a place to study or work or dwell or hang out. So this sort of corridor beside the amphitheater is also a study space. And on the right, another passage leads to the archive. And those are William Morris stained glass windows on display. And then in the upper level, again, the North Quad with its cloister, the foyer to the auditorium, and the auditorium, which has the roof sort of peels back and faces the south because it's on the north side of the building. The roof form acts as a kind of funnel to pull light from across the building in front of it and to illuminate this space. So this is very much a multi-purpose space, and yeah, used at all times of day and year. And then back through the cloister, up the stairs, the signage done by DePass Montgomery, very nice palette of brass. And then the corridors in the student rooms, which never have a dead end. There's always a window at the end of each corridor, and the communal kitchens, which act as these gathering spaces. There's always people studying in the kitchens as well. And then the study rooms that are under the curved roof get a very nice sweeping roof form. And then if you look up here, you can see the fellow studies up in that top glazed area. And these are where students come to have their tutorials, and it's also where the tutors and fellows do their research. So they're kind of teaching, research, office spaces. So it kind of, and here's the roof terrace. So it kind of, in a way, demonstrates the model, the very efficient use of space, and the idea of a kind of mixing and diversity in the program of the building, that you have people working, teaching, researching, publishing, living, all in the same building. And so the building really, its community is expressed in a sort of fresh way by the language of its roof, and by the patterning, which refers to a kind of history and iconography of Exeter College. And now this S-shaped quad acts as a new interpretation of the archetypal four-sided quadrangle. It's become a sort of open form. So I want to make sure I make it through to the last project, which is the Maggie. So I'm just going to go through this one really quickly, which is another. This is a project which is on site right now. So I guess I thought it would be worthwhile talking about because it shows a kind of scale shift between Ely Court. It's another kind of dwelling. It's urban dwelling, but it is an archetype in my view, the kind of urban tower. It's in King's Cross, which I'm sure you all know is the site of a massive regeneration for the last 25 years. And I was invited and won a competition for this site up at the top end of the master plan, at the top of Lewis Cubitt Park, opposite Coal Drops Yard, and lots of other very good buildings by lots of good architects, and you all sort of know the scene around King's Cross, but it is a very successful example of kind of, in a way, stewardship and patronage by Argent, who've just made sure that everything is done to a very high quality. Here is, on the bottom right, is Granary Square, this fantastic square, and all of this has been converted and done. This is quite an old photo. And here is the site. So this kind of empty space at the top of the park is going to be filled by this project. And then, but it's also a front door from the north. So it's another project that has no front or back, which seems to be a characteristic of many of my projects. They're basically a front on all sides. And of course, I was inspired by the context of King's Cross and St. Pancras Station, another building by George Gilbert Scott, not just in Oxford, but here in London. And, you know, one of my favorite buildings in London. It's just so incredible, St. Pancras Station, for its brickwork, its craftsmanship, and its arches. And so here are some kind of study models and sketches done during the competition, trying to explore how to get the density required of the scheme into the site and produce a kind of decent, good quality urban response to the context. And so you can see the site is a kind of pentagon, and it had to address the park, address the square here, and create a new kind of threshold towards York Way. So what we developed was a courtyard scheme. So it's a kind of courtyard tower, which I like as a sort of oxymoron, the principle of making a quadrangle into a tower project, but this is what we've tried. So this is the kind of evolution of the scheme. The master plan massing has to span the tunnel of the Thames Link, getting the light into the dwellings and creating a kind of threshold, and then framing all the sides of the block with frontages. And most important, bringing a language of arches to the base and places around the top of the building to create this kind of urban silhouette, and to create a sort of identity of King's Cross is pulled from Euston Road up to the top of the site to York Way. So it has a kind of clear character that's associated with King's Cross. And here we are very happy after we presented our scheme, and happy to be selected to go ahead with the project. And so here's the basic format of the scheme. So affordable dwellings, they're actually pocket living dwellings back here, which are, well, it's the front actually to York Way, but I think it's 35% of the scheme, and then private dwellings and mixed use commercial and workspace on the ground floor. And this is very tight floor plan, hardly any parking. It's more or less zero parking except for disabled access. Very hard working plans, quite dense, 2 cores. And then, of course, we had to spend a lot of time figuring out how to make our language of brick and of arches, making it feasible, making it buildable. And we've been part of a very interesting process of working with the contractor, Lang O'Rourke, who are going to make the entire building in prefabricated panels, working directly from our Revit files. So we've become part of the manufacturing process here. It's all going to be precast panels sandwiched with the brick assembled in the factory. So there's been just a huge amount of work working with the contractor to achieve this system, but what's really important about it is it reduces construction waste, it reduces journeys to site, it reduces, it's better for safety. It's kind of the future, I think. Prefabrication, whether it's timber, whether it's concrete, but in a way, this is very similar to the kind of Roman method of building buildings, which was using brick as the formwork for the concrete. Here, the brick is sandwiched to insulation and concrete, but it's basically very similar as a build-up, except insulated. So we pulled the language of arches into the foyer and communal spaces and worked with mirrors to create an illusion of sort of infinite colonnades. This is the courtyard passage to the two cores. From the courtyard, you can see out to the park. And yeah, we're always trying to get this sort of double and triple transparency through buildings to create that sense of connection. One of the flats at the upper level is basically the same quality of space as in South Kilburn, the French doors with 2.6 or 3 meter high ceilings. So we've brought the same language here to King's Cross. And interestingly, because the massing has to step down to York Way because of the Thameslink tunnel, the arches become a sort of independent building, and which kind of evoke railway viaducts, sort of like the viaducts that extend out the back of St. Pancras Station. So it's been, in a way, a really interesting exercise of being able to make a kind of courtyard building, bring it, a kind of density that makes it viable and feasible for this kind of location, but bringing in the kind of best qualities of accommodation that we've proven in South Kilburn. Sorry, I'm not sure what's happened here. And here is the internal courtyard at night with a kind of ambulatory around the reflecting pool. So finally here, I'm exactly at the time I'm supposed to stop, but I'm going to finish with Maggie, since it's close to all of your hearts, as I understand, in Somerset. And it is true that unfortunately we lost this site, but we hope we're going to be able to carry on working with Musgrove Park Hospital to realize a project on their grounds. So I think, as you all know, Maggie's have this fantastic model of designing a place where patients who've been diagnosed with cancer can go to a non-clinical, inviting, warm, domestic kind of environment to get advice and counseling and help with benefits, cooking classes, therapies, massage, like many different services that are offered. But the most important thing is helping people to feel at home, to come to terms with their diagnosis, and to learn to live, in a way, live well with cancer, hopefully to overcome it. But hopefully, if that's not possible, then you can live the remainder of your life as well as possible. So, and this quote of Charles Jenks is, of course, really important. Art and architecture are important allies in the perennial struggle with cancer, and this leads to the basic metaphor, the architecture of hope. So it's a very, very demanding brief to try to design in a way that makes people feel really good about where they are and who they are, but in effect, all architecture should make people feel really good about where they are and who they are. And so this idea of making dwellings of any kind help enhance health and well-being is kind of distilled in a Maggie Centre. So here you can see Taunton, the overall city plan, and the red dot is the Maggie's Taunton on Golmington playing fields. And I mean, you all know now that this site is not going to be feasible, but just to give you a bit of background, the Beacon Centre is one of the, it serves a huge population in the southwest of England in terms of offering radiotherapy and the kind of clinical care that comes with a proper cancer centre. And so the great thing about this site was that it was an opportunity to go from the Beacon Centre down a passage and arrive at this little pocket of space where you could look out from the hospital across these playing fields and feel connected to the landscape and to the broader context. And so this is looking actually back at the site, so you can see this is the hospital, sort of low-lying hospital, and the changing rooms and the football fields, which are very popular and important asset for the community. But our site was this little playground tucked here in the corner that was really not used. You can see it here outlined in blue. So there was this kind of really hidden and unsafe piece of land behind the changing rooms. And then, the footpath that everybody uses is here. And this was really just not used anymore, a piece of kind of, backlands. And so we did, some of our research into the wider context of the vicinity included things like Glastonbury Abbey, which has this tradition of, which had a kitchen sort of basically built within the abbey walls, and this sort of interesting idea of a kitchen being a pavilion and being part of sort of having its own identity, sort of openings in the corners. And so in a way this informed our partie, which, the Maggie's brief is quite simple. It's the kitchen and the kitchen area, and the kitchen table is the hub. And then there are treatment rooms and group rooms and therapy rooms and a little administrative office. And so our approach was to take this program and sort of create a branching arrangement so that the various spaces formed 4 wings. And between each wing there would be a garden, each facing one of the main cardinal directions, and from the central space you could see diagonally across to each wing. And so this creates this kind of multi-sided building that gets light at different kinds of the day, and then has a screening kind of veranda overlooking the park. And so these ideas of making the building act as a kind of vessel, also to hold water in its roofs to help mediate the flooding and the water management in the site, and also that it could act a little bit like a park pavilion that has this tradition of verandas and balconies overlooking the activities in the park. And then these are just some early sketches of how the kitchen at the center with the branching structure would work, and then the idea of the roofs acting as leaves or cups to hold water and release it slowly into the landscape. So this is the plan, the final plan that we developed. So there was the approach from the Beacon Centre was basically going through an orchard to this front pavilion with a veranda, wraparound veranda, a foyer space for visitors to kind of pause and catch their breath before they entered the main space. And then in here, the central kitchen. Sorry, the image isn't that great, but there's a kitchen here, an island, and then a big table. And then the kind of large treatment room here, yoga room, library, counseling areas, another counseling area here, obviously washrooms and service spaces, and then upstairs some further sort of corners for counseling, and then the administrative staff offices. So a very simple program, and we worked with Joanna Gibbons to develop a really integrated landscape scheme using indigenous wetland species and willows and a sort of ha-ha between the Maggies. So there would be sort of 4 layers. There were Maggies, the veranda with its screening elements, mounded earth, a ha-ha, willows, like a whole series of enhancements of the landscape in terms of its character and its qualities to really integrate this building into this little corner of the park. So this is an image of the approach, which kind of bridges across a rill which runs under the building and through the site, and a material palette of aluminium and sort of stone or pebble walls and timber. So it was going to be a kind of hybrid structure of concrete for thermal mass and timber. So this is a sort of early view of the foyer looking into the main space. The standing at the kitchen island, looking out across the veranda and towards the playing fields. And then upstairs in the kind of working area with also some counseling spaces under this kind of dipped roof. And then this is looking down the kind of along the northwest wing, and on the right was going to be the library area, and then obviously on the left the kind of garden space between the wings. So yeah, and these are the kind of views. Curtains could be pulled across these screens to create a more or less privacy within each of these rooms. And yeah, finally the image from the playing fields. So in a way, this project expresses a kind of dwelling idea of dwelling in the landscape, of working with the archetype of a park pavilion, explores that relationship between buildings that act as balconies onto the landscape, but also help inhabitants to feel kind of safe and private, but connected to the world. So unfortunately, as you know, this project isn't going ahead in this form, in this place, but I hope I'll be able to yeah, develop something equally as helpful to Maggie's and its program with Musgrove Park Hospital in the future. So that's the end of my talk, I believe. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and yeah, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Alison, that was fantastic. Thank you. It's a shame on MS on Microsoft Teams that there isn't a clap or cheer function. It's always very difficult to finish a presentation and not have any feedback from the audience. But I think that was fantastic. Thank you. Very inspirational, and it's going to be very difficult to go back to my normal practice work now and pick up some momentum. We are, what are we? We're 3:10. There's a few questions that Mark and I have and would like to go through very quickly, but then we'll put some questions from the floor, if that's okay with you, and we'll try and finish at about 3:30. So obviously we just finished off with Maggie Centre, and it's rather disheartening, the story that's been through. But what is the next step? Is it a case of new site, new scheme, and start all over again, or are there certain elements you can use of the current building in a different site?
Well, I guess that remains to be seen, because until we find that new site, and we won't know what relationship it will have with any of its contexts. You know, we had this kind of extraordinary freedom with that little pocket site in the park to make a you know, a four-sided building. But the hospital grounds are very dense. And the reason we located that site in the first place was because of the lack of a suitable site elsewhere. And the hospital also does have a master plan, a development master plan, and a lot of changes are going to be happening in the future. But I hope I've been speaking to Maggie's, and they are definitely keen to do a Maggie's at Musgrove Park and in Taunton. But I think until the pandemic situation is over and everybody's vaccinated and the hospital is sort of back on into a more normal situation, probably that's when the conversation will restart. But I think you can probably see from all of the projects I've showed that my interest in the importance of sort of threshold spaces, you know, the verandas at Maggie's, or the colonnades or the arcades and the cloisters, that these are very important gestures in terms of sort of speaking to an audience, to whoever uses your building. Creating that transition between the public realm and the inner space of a building is a really important thing, and also the expression of the roof as being a kind of vessel to contain and hold water and to support biodiversity, all of these things, and also making it in timber. I mean, it would be fantastic to make a completely timber building.
Yeah, you mentioned around the Musgrove Park, it's very dense and actually quite, well, relatively run down. Do you think perhaps there could be a site that could act as a panacea to actually regenerate some of these areas? Use the centre as the panacea?
I mean, yeah, it could be. I mean, that could be, like, I'd be very happy to work in the deepest, darkest part of the campus to transform it and create a little oasis somehow. So yes, I don't think it's necessary to have to work in this greenfield situation. It's very interesting with all the Maggies to see how different architects have dealt with that context, because everybody has pretty much had to deal with either a ring road or some kind of bit leftover piece of space on the edge of a car park, and it's amazing what you can do with very limited space.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously we're local, or Mark and I are local. I'm sure there's lots of Somerset-based architects in the delegates today. Is there anything we can do as local lobbyists to to help you through, to facilitate the new centre? Or is it all just wrapped up in local politics?
Sure. I mean, I think. Well, let's see. Maggie's relies on not only a relationship with the local hospital, but it's a charity, and it relies on donations, and it relies on to build every one of its Maggie's centres. And so part of our work with Maggie's and in Taunton was to also, make a project that everybody could get really excited about. And I think it's true now that 1 in 3 of us will get cancer at some point, so we're all going to get cancer virtually. The service and the quality of space and the quality of sort of comfort that Maggie Centres offers to cancer patients is really incredible, and I think as a kind of investment in a public service, it is a public free service. It's an incredible thing to support. So whether it's via the, Musgrove Park Hospital or Maggie's or their Twitter campaign or through donations, in every little bit helps.
It certainly does. Yeah. Thank you. You're currently, I think you're sitting at home. I'm certainly sitting at home. How does your practice function remotely? How are you working collaboratively via the internet? How is it affecting efficiency in your projects?
I don't think it is. I actually think it's been very efficient. I think we've gotten to the point now where we can be in a Zoom call in one corner of our screen and sending an email on another corner of our screen and talking on the phone. Like, in a way, it's very intense, I think, this way of working. I haven't been home the whole time. I went back into the office between July and December, but then I didn't go back after December 23rd or something like that, because I just thought, okay, I'm going to stay, really follow the rules properly and stay home. But we work really heavily with Teams and with Miro, the Miro project boards, and it's actually been, we've done competitions, but it is yeah, it's been very intense. There's a kind of, there's somehow more intensity, I think, to this.
Yeah, I guess you don't have the water cooler moments.
Yeah, it's sort of like tunnel vision and blinkers, and you can sort of work faster and probably get more done and do more things at once, glued to your seat. But it's really not very healthy. I don't think it's not good for your brain either.
No. You mentioned you're obviously running competitions. It seems at the moment, touch wood, construction industry is quite buoyant down the southwest. How does that compare to the southeast? And are you having to be quite proactive in getting new work in, or is it finding you?
Well, I think both. We were very lucky that when lockdown hit, or when the pandemic hit, a lot of our projects were in the middle of planning stages, or just about, in the middle of stage 4, or sort of like with the momentum that they couldn't stop. And so we were very, very busy, and that was lucky. And then we did a competition actually in Moscow in July, and we won it. Like, it was an invited competition, and we did it and we won it, and that was very fast track, and we launched straight into that. But then there have been some smaller project inquiries. It's been pretty consistent, because I think people have realized, well, this is still a good time to plan. We're basically in a planning industry, like projecting into the future, and everybody still felt the need to carry on, projecting into the future.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
it's. I think we've all learned from it, really, haven't we?
Yeah.
In a positive way. Thank you, Alison. We got a question here from an architectural assistant at HTA Design. Reference Windward House. What precedents or inspiration do you use when designing the house gallery in terms of typology?
I really try to avoid looking at other projects I'm designing. I try to design things that I haven't really seen before, or if they remind me of something, then I have to throw it out and start again, unless it's something that's at least sort of 100 or 200 years old. That's why when I designed Ely Court, what I was really thinking about was Place des Vosges in Paris. It's a really beautiful square with housing on all the upper floors. And I got to stay in one of those flats in 1985, I think, and where every window is a French door, and it's just kind of bliss if you live in a flat where every window is a French door. And so then I just said, that's it. That's how I'm going to design housing. I can make it as good as Place des Vosges, then I'll be happy. So Windward House, I think, also was part of a kind of series of explorations in private houses that probably started with the Fold House back in 2002 or something, or 4. can't quite remember, but where I started working with a language of folded, like a single plane of metal, and then cutting and folding that single plane, trying to sort of dematerialize architecture. And that sort of translated itself into the Wrap House, and then into New Hall B, and then into Windward House. And so they've been kind of iterations or development of a sort of exploration to see how far I could take that language. Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, this is an interesting one, because there's a next question here from Natasha. I don't know where Natasha's from, but the question is, you said that architecture is slow, but architecture nowadays, especially housing, is also dating very quickly. What's your view on architecture dating, and how does that affect your work?
Well, that's a really good point and a really good question, and I think, and that's also a problem. And why I tend to refer to these sort of very old examples when I show clients an example of what I'm trying to achieve. Normally, it's like a Victorian building or a Georgian building or a Gothic building. I will never, ever show a modern building as a precedent, because those historic buildings are proven. They're proven to work and to last over time and to be treasured and valued and loved. And so I try to extract the sort of DNA of those historic precedents, like proportions, ceiling height, plan organization, like the mansion block, and kind of translate them into a sort of simpler, feasible scheme in terms of contemporary construction practice, but fundamentally to adhere to a kind of tried and tested format. And yeah, I try to work with brick, and stone is very expensive, but these kind of mass materials that are timeless and that express permanence. I've kind of moved away from the from the weightlessness idea into one that's more about mass, but every project is about the context. Windward House is also about weightlessness, because I was trying to create a counterpoint to the existing house that would be fundamentally, sort of contrast, complementary contrast, by working with a weightless material that's sort of black and also timeless. Like, you can't really associate it with anything because of its color, and it kind of disappears at night as well because of its darkness.
Yeah, it's just a shadow of the former house. These questions are coming in really quite well, actually. These segue quite nicely. So Lydia Randall from BDG Architecture and Design asks, your thoughts on the future of prefabrication in support of sustainability are really interesting. How do you think the process of working with this through St Pancras impacted on programme and budgets?
Well, I think that's the crux of the issue, is that there's a lot of negativity about concrete because of its embodied carbon. It's a high energy material to produce, but it's got these advantages of thermal mass and longevity and permanence and robustness and fire protection, all of those things. And apparently, analysis, like our M&E consultants have shown that kind of projections, done analysis of different building envelopes and frames using timber versus thermal mass and versus concrete. And in terms of dealing with the temperature changes that we might be facing by 2050, the energy consumption and operationally and embodied carbon in concrete turns out to be less than timber. So it's a really fluid, hard to pin down subject matter at the moment in terms of where to go. So, but one of the positive things about what we're doing in King's Cross is this principle of really reducing waste on site, because something like 50% of all materials on construction site get thrown out. There's incredible amounts of construction waste. And so if you can eliminate that construction waste, that means reducing the energy of producing all that stuff that gets thrown out, and then also of recycling all of that construction waste. And, you know, it's also about quality control and precision and reducing vehicle journeys to site. That's also enormous. And when you have lots of different trades and lots of different materials all being shipped into site, you know, the vehicle journeys and emissions from that are enormous. So what we're hoping this project proves is that we can really reduce the time frame, the emissions, the embodied carbon, and I think, well, what I don't know is the cost factor. Like, does it make it cheaper? I don't know, but time is money, and so if the construction program is reduced by a third, that's a huge amount of money that can be saved.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest cost in construction is probably labour, isn't it? So you're right. If it's prefabrication, it should all work out cheaper. There are no further questions, and I think we're just about to run out of time. So really, Alison, thank you so much. It's been a great way to spend an hour and a half on a Tuesday afternoon. And for me personally, it's wonderful because I feel like I've met one of my heroes now, and I've learned a massive amount. And like I said, it's going to be a bit daunting going back to my practice now to do that. But I've definitely taken something from this, and I think we all have. And I think I'm talking on behalf of everyone listening. So really, it leaves me to say thank you so much, Alison, on behalf of Mark and I and the team at RIBA Southwest. Thank you. And I rather hope we could book you in a couple of years' time to talk about Maggie Centre Part 2, if you'll be good enough to come back and speak to us.
Well, it's been yeah, you're very welcome.
Good, thank you. Yes, thank you, Alison. And then thank you to Ibstock Brick for sponsoring the event. And also to the delegates, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. The series will continue. We've already got a few things up our sleeves, so keep looking out for the posts on all social media, on all the platforms, and yeah, subscribe to the Eventbrite notifications and you get them all in your email, and hopefully we shall see you all soon. But Alison, from all of us, thank you very much. It's been great.
Very welcome. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.